Welcome to Four Quarter Lives, a podcast exploring the profound impact of longer lives and careers on everything: countries, companies, couples, and careers. I'm Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, and on this week's Four Quarter Lives, I talk with Herminia Ibarra, professor at London Business School and author of the seminal book, Working Identity, that's just been republished. This is a favorite book of many career changers I know because it offers such an action-oriented approach to getting out there to make change happen. We explore why change is so hard for so many. Why do we get invested in our past selves and find it so hard to imagine our future selves? And why midlife transitions are so under-institutionalized. If you want to understand what that means, listen up. Welcome, Herminia Ibarra, to Four Quarter Lives. Really, really delighted to have you here.
I was so pleased to be here, Avivah, after all these years.
You and I go back a long
ways. Yeah.
A few too many decades to count, but we hung around INSEAD for a long time in parallel, and our interests. I'm one of your biggest fans and passionate followers. I feel like I echo you half the time, but that's okay. I'm going to get a whole nother hour of quotable quotes. Today, we're going to be talking career transitions. You've done all kinds of work on leadership and what it takes and how to step up. But here we're going to focus more on one of your really seminal books that's marked almost everybody I know. They all refer to this book, Working Identity, that you've just actually republished with an updated entry. Maybe to start, why is it so relevant now? And it seems even more so than when you first published it.
Oh, gosh, yeah. I mean, for all the reasons that people are thinking about career transition more often, it's more relevant now because more people are doing it, either because they want to or because they're forced to, because we are also seeing a lot of disruption in the big organizations that have been traditional employers. And so people have to find alternative pathways. We know, today the hype is about generative AI, before it was something else, but we know all of these things mean that the possibility set is going to be shifting. They also open up a lot of possibilities for people. What we're doing right now is made possible through technology. Yeah. And then, of course, and this is your passion nowadays, we're living longer. And so, whereas people might have wanted to hang on a little bit longer, that stretch is looking to be a bit too vast for just hanging on. And so people are starting to invest more in these later phases. And this has been, I started studying careers now almost 35 years ago, and the trend's been on that we want more and more out of our work. We love it. We value it. When we hate it, we hate it. We want flexibility. We want meaning. We want purpose. We want passion. We want it all.
Everything.
And everything. Regular jobs provide that less and less.
Yeah. There's a gap here somewhere.
So there's no wonder people want to change. So we're seeing, since Working Identity, we're just seeing a lot more career change. I think more involuntary. I look every once in a while at these websites that track mass layoffs. It's crazy. And there's more options now. The paths are much more do-it-yourself.
So maybe just to set the stage, I remember at the time when I first read this, and it didn't impact me directly, but now that I've been in a career transition about for the last 5 years, one of the key messages I originally took from the book was that career transitions, especially in midlife, just take so much longer than people think. And I still have people coming to me saying, I'd like to get this all sorted and know what I'm doing by summer. And it's like you kind of nod your head and you say, yep, okay, settle in, fasten your seatbelts. Why does it take so much longer than anybody thinks? And how do we adjust people's expectations to a more realistic pacing?
Yeah, it does. First of all, it does. That is the bad news of all of this. It takes much longer than you think, even when you think you've got it all figured out and you know what you want to do, which is rare. I think part of it is we don't give the bad news often enough. I even had a little chat with my editor when I was revising Working Identity and writing the new preface. And, she kind of wanted me to play down the how long it takes because people don't want to hear that. That's a pessimistic message. They want to hear, here you go, all these possibilities.
Just do it. And it'll miraculously happen in 3 months. Yeah.
I always say, let's start with the bad news. It's going to take longer than you think. And it's going to be a messy, non-linear process. It's going to drive you crazy. Let's just get started with that. And the reason why it takes so long is that in most cases, you have one or two of two situations. One is, and this is the most common, you know what you don't want, but you don't know what you want instead. You haven't figured it out. And so part of the search process is exploration, finding ideas, finding possibilities. You have to fine tune them. You have to play with them. In the other case, people know what they want, but it isn't possible. It isn't available. There isn't a job for them like that, with that pay or at that level of responsibility or what have you. And then they're going to have to back down from it. What are some adjacencies? What are other possibilities? And we get back into exploratory mode. So that's why it takes so long. It also takes long because if you are going the route of employers rather than the kind of the do-it-yourself portfolio or auto entrepreneurship or what have you, companies are just taking much longer to vet and interview people. These are extended processes that easily last into 6 months once you get there, and getting there takes a while.
It is a little bit ironic that you, of all people, have been writing about career transitions when, frankly, you've been a professor like all your working life. Now, you've changed institutions a number of times, but share a bit of your background and how you got first interested in this theme, and is it convincing you to stay stable when you watch everybody else paddling desperately to transition?
It is funny, and I get teased a lot by that. But instead of changing careers, I'm lucky. I'm an academic. You can do so much as an academic. So when I have a midlife crisis, and I've had several, I just change countries. But
I've done that. I've done that too.
I was always academically inclined, and my hunch from my teenage years ended up being a good one. I did a PhD. And out of the PhD, I went straight to Harvard Business School, where I had my first academic job as a professor. And I've loved it ever since. And I've stayed in it. At some point, I shifted. I moved to INSEAD after 13 years at Harvard. And I stayed there a long while until I joined the London Business School. And those are significant shifts. At the same time, they're not as monumental as the ones that I studied, because academia is such a global thing. Even if you're shifting institutions, you're not necessarily shifting networks. And we have so much leeway to write and research and teach on whatever happens to be intriguing us at the moment. So I feel very lucky that way.
Can you share, just because those are interesting transitions and you've worked for some of the biggest institutions in the world, what was the difference? What was the difference like in you at those different career phases? Because I imagine that starting at HBS as the young woman you were was not an easy time or ride, but maybe not.
No, it wasn't. And I've gotten a lot of copy out of that. In fact, my travails, my challenges there are the main story of my TED Talk about authenticity. So I definitely struggled to find myself and find my voice there. And as we always say, when it was hard, I learned so much. But it was very good training for a lot of things. And it's a fantastic place. I left and I moved to INSEAD because it wasn't about the work. It was about the life. I didn't like Boston. I couldn't see myself be there long term. And I knew the more time passed, it's not just cold. It's a whole lot of things. I knew that if I kept going, I'd just stay there. And for me, it felt like something was missing. And so actually, the funny thing is I was in Paris visiting INSEAD on sabbatical, and I was working on this book. And it was only a couple of years later that I realized I followed exactly the method that I described for changing careers myself, in that I tried an experiment. I went on a sabbatical somewhere else. I didn't burn my bridges, which is what I always recommend. If you can, stay where you are, muck around, experiment, play, try things out. But you don't know what you don't know. And I was able to prolong that a bit because a year definitely wasn't enough to be able to make up my mind. But part of what that does is it starts to give you new networks. It separates you from the old thing. So it has less of a hold on you. And then over time, you start thinking about it more concretely. But I felt like that was the life that I wanted to have and not much more than the one that I did. And so I stayed. It was still very difficult. And it was definitely a challenge for my mother to find out that my mother, the Cuban immigrant, her daughter is leaving a full professor job at Harvard voluntarily. What is wrong with you?
Oh, absolutely. I can only imagine.
Yeah. But the big difference was INSEAD was younger then, as we all, so it was more entrepreneurial. Harvard is so established.
Yeah,
there's a level of professionalism and history and way of doing things, and people who will tell you how to do it because they've come before. Whereas at INSEAD, it was kind of new territory. Oh, you want to teach a course on that? Go ahead. If it doesn't work, we won't let you keep doing it, but try it out for sure. Don't worry. Really anything. And that was mid-career for me. It was really enjoyable to just be able to muck around, create courses, do more entrepreneurial things. And so I got a big kick out of that.
And then LBS, London? Did you get tired of Paris?
No. I'll never tire of Paris. That was much more for family reasons. It made sense in lots of ways. And, I never burned my bridges. So.
And it's fascinating. I dig a little bit because that is actually a fairly archetypal journey, right? A lot of people, especially the kind of people we're hanging out with in all these business schools, have this first phase that is super status, admired, pinnacle, and then yearn for a little bit more life, a little bit more balance, a little bit more flair or something, or entrepreneurial freedoms. And then eventually, adjust and make new choices for a new phase of life, and often the family issues that come haunting us again back in later life. So, okay, so you haven't, totally changed every bit of your career, but you're pretty well on the same journey as the people you're writing about.
We are all.
So why are these changes so hard? And often what I'm really struck by is so emotional. Like people don't admit, I think, how emotional they are, especially most men, I think, kind of tamp down. But if you dig a little bit or you know them,
they're hugely emotional. And there is so much fear and anxiety and angst. Also, anticipation. It's, the shiny sparkle of something new and unknown, but there's a lot of fear and anxiety. And there's two big reasons. One is that what we do is who we are. It is one of our strongest bases of identity, because if you think about it, just in terms of time you spend every day on it, it's what you do, it's the company you keep, it's the story you tell. I worked hard, I got this degree, I got that job. Changing disrupts everything. It's not just, it disrupts everything. And so that sense of loss, even when you want to, it is that you're giving up something you struggled so much for and that shapes your existence. And then, of course, there's just so much uncertainty about what you're trading it in for. The definition of transition is you're moving away from something while moving towards something that's still undefined. You don't know what it is yet. And so you get into this kind of limbo. Who am I? All those big questions open up. You feel unsure, and especially in later career, you're supposed to have it all together. You're supposed to know what you want and what you're about and not have these doubts and so on. But the minute you have this kind of suspension of a core aspect of who you are, all the doubts come rushing in, and it's good. We can get into that. There's an aspect that's very productive about it, but it's very, very scary. The thing that feeds it and makes it scarier is this idea that the older we get, the more under-institutionalized career change is. And that's a big academic word to say. That is, you're doing it yourself. There's not a well-worn groove to fit into. It's not like becoming partner in a big law firm. You go to law school and then you get this job and then you do this and then you're doing it with other people. There's a time frame. You know how long it takes. You could fail, but you know what's involved. From mid-career and beyond, first of all, you don't know how long it's going to take. You're not doing it with other people. You're not in a cohort. You don't necessarily have somebody who is the role model of how to do it. What steps do you need to take? Well, it all depends. Say you're an investment banker and you want to be a wine entrepreneur. What are the steps? Well, there could be endless sequences of steps that lead you from A to Z, and somebody else making the same shift will have taken different steps. And so there's many more unknowns. It's a more complex process to manage and make decisions about. There's less feedback involved. It's harder to benchmark yourself. So all of those things, institutions are the things that kind of structure what are the norms, what are the expectations, what are the rules. And we don't have that. It's good because it's more freeing. You can be more self-authoring, but you got to really struggle your way through it on your own.
And a lot of it is, especially initially, I think, so intrinsically driven. It's invisible to everybody around you. Why in the world would you want to leave? Like your mother with your position at heart. Why would you want to leave? And when everybody looks at you like you're out of your mind, it's very hard to stay convinced that you might want to wander into the dark forest.
That was another one of the light bulbs in working identity, and I still see it today. If you are lucky enough to be in a good job and wanting to get out of it, because sometimes we're booted out, and that's why we're changing.
That's yes.
But if you're lucky enough, everybody around you, friends and family and colleagues, will think you're out of your mind. And you should just be kind of tied to the mast so you don't do something that's going to hurt you, because why would you?
Yeah, because they're probably pretty invested in whatever you were.
They're invested. They are invested in what you were doing. Yeah. And maybe you doing it is a little scary. What could that imply for them? Are they going to have to think about it too? Yeah, it's like when a couple is getting divorced, nobody wants to talk to them for fear of contamination. There's a bit of that here.
Absolutely. So does preparation and normalization help? Is that making it easier? Do you find that once people have read your book, they have an easier time?
Yes and no. It kind of depends. The big message of my book is act your way into a new career, into your new self. You can't reflect. So this preparation is all very hypothetical until you start doing things. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes it kind of, it gives you a way to fill up time. You feel like you're doing, but you're not really until you start doing something a bit more actively. But I think where it helps is seeing examples of people, oh, this is interesting, or this is somebody that's a bit like me. And that's the normalization. I think today we see many, many more examples and more role models, certainly, 20 years ago, maybe still not enough. But that helps, because when you see somebody else who's done it, you think, okay, this could work out for me.
Yep, absolutely. And the media is getting much better at portraying some of these pictures. So I love this quote. So maybe one day we will be better able to avoid what you call the tumult and turmoil of straying from the linear path, a time of confusion, loss, insecurity, and struggle. So yes, that's what we want to help people get through. So you've just published a revised edition of Working Identity, which I really recommend because it's got some interesting updates. And there's still these two simple ideas at its heart that I wanted to dig into. And the first one I love is this idea that working identity is not a hidden treasure waiting to be discovered. What do you mean by that?
In the world of career development and career decision, there has always been this kind of great myth, the myth of the true self. You've got to find yourself, know who you are, and then that's it. All you have to do is implement. All you have to do is find that inner essence that really defines you, that is who you are. And it's a myth. It's BS. That doesn't exist. We are possibilities, and maybe not endless possibilities, but many different possibilities for who we might become in the future. And in fact, if you look at how we evolve, we do end up changing much more than we ever kind of imagined. So one of the two big ideas in working identity is that our identities are at the heart of this, but identity is multiple, it's mutable, it's changing, and it really is what you enact by trying things out, by moving into new areas, by experimenting. There's always a gap between who you think you are and then what you actually do when push comes to shove. And it's the same thing with career change. There's no point trying to excavate that true essence because there may not be actual job options that correspond to it. The real you is the one that's going to pick A over B, or the one who's going to invest in C and minimize their time spent in D. That's kind of voting with your feet in terms of who you are. So the big message is that we are multiple possibilities, and that the process of career change is one of experimenting with those possibilities until you find, something that is a reasonably good fit. You act your way into it by playing with those options, generating those options. As you find things that don't fit, you look elsewhere, you look more adjacent, or you get a little bit more creative. And it is that iterative, almost fast prototyping yourself kind of process.
We absolutely have design thinking.
Yeah.
So 2 questions. One, did you get pushback from, all the career and personality types on this idea? And my other question is, you really strongly recommend for outsight versus insight, this idea of going out and exploring rather than spending too much time navel gazing.
Yeah.
And my question is, at midlife, now, post 50, let's say, isn't there a time and a place to digest the past and grow a degree of self-awareness before you launch a new journey? Because I find people haven't taken that time very often.
Reflection is good.
Okay. We're allowed to reflect.
Well, look, this is when my students at London Business School arrive on day one in the Sloan program, which is a mid-career change program. On day one of the big lessons and takeaways is that self-awareness is hard. There is a massive amount of research that shows how biased we are in terms of how we assess ourselves, how much other people pigeonhole us. And so knowing yourself is hard. And when you look at the psychology of it, the way you know yourself is you put something out there, you do something, and then you see what happens and you reflect on it. So that's where the reflective part comes in. You do something, you reflect on it. Now, there are certainly times and places for reflecting on things you've done in the past and what you've learned from them. And that's great. But when you look at people struggling, that's not where their problem lies. Their problem lies in actually getting moving to do something with those learnings. And so what I have found is that you're better off getting started with maybe a less than ideal amount of self-awareness, but you're exploring and you're getting new inputs to kind of spark that thought process, than waiting until I've got it all figured out in my head and now I can just go and do. And then it just so happens that there isn't an NED role available that fits your plan. You see what I mean? Now, this is assuming that you're not going to go and take a huge leap without much self-awareness. Most people don't, but sometimes what happens, and this is the danger of not being aware. Say a headhunter comes with something that looks like the perfect solution to your malaise wherever you are right now. And you say, okay, fine, that'll change my context, give me some, a fresh environment, but you end up pretty much in the same kind of situation. That's not good. And that's often an error due to not enough reflection.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it is people who get stuck. They want to change. They don't know what to. They don't do anything. They start blaming themselves. This came up in spades on the surveys we've been doing of the people who do webinars with me on this. They blame themselves. I don't have the right mindset. I'm too rigid. I'm too this. And that reduces their self-confidence. And so they're less likely to take those steps. And so it gets into a cycle of worse than analysis paralysis. It's a kind of a confidence
self-doubt. Yeah.
Self-doubt is very rampant. And so much better to take a bit of a small wins kind of approach. How can I always talk about flirting with your possible selves? Take small steps, explore, don't commit, take on a project, do something on the side, even read a book, take a course, give a course, whatever it is, play with it. Don't give up your day job. And then let's see. And if you don't have your day job because you've been fired or, your organization doesn't exist anymore, likewise, don't sit around waiting for the perfect thing to materialize. Start doing other things, even if they're not your next career, that will shore up your sense of identity, of being able to add value, of being a competent person, getting out in the world with other people. All of those things will help build up that identity that's gotten battered by the loss. And it will get you to a point where you can reflect in a way that is less fear-based, in a way that is less reactive, less rigid, more expansive.
Yeah, and based in some kind of reality. So that's a good link to the second major idea of the book, which is changing careers means changing ourselves. And so basically what you're saying is these flirts and experiments and travels are basically a journey towards your next incarnation.
Yeah, because if identity is what you do and the company you keep and the story that you tell, as you change those things, you are changing yourself.
Yep, which is wonderful, right? I don't think that's where people start when they say, I need a new job or I need a new city. They're not on a journey to be changing themselves.
That's maybe not a career change. I don't have the recipe for how to get a new job. That's not a career change problem. That's an implementation problem. Very, very different kind of thing. I look at people who want to move into something quite different from what they were doing.
So are there typical steps or phases that over the years of this process that people can get to know, walk through? Get a guide.
So as you can imagine, I don't have a kind of a linear phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, because people start from very different points. They all end up in that messy middle liminality where they have to muck around and experiment, have doubt. But they start from different points. Sometimes they start with an ending, a loss. They can't do this anymore. Sometimes they start with a new beginning because they have been either running a startup on their side time or, being on the board of something that now asks them to come into an operational role. So sometimes it starts with a new beginning. Sometimes it starts just a kind of like a simmering dissatisfaction that's building, but the person's not doing anything. So it can start in lots of different ways. Endings are beginnings, beginnings are endings. But they all end up at some point, as soon as they start taking a more active approach, they all end up in this liminal, messy middle phase where you get very confused about who you are and what you want. And that confusion, in a way, keeps you from acting prematurely. It's a bit of a
interesting.
Keeps you from acting prematurely. And it means that you give yourself enough time to play around. Now, it doesn't mean you're giving yourself enough time without making any money. A lot of people manage this by, doing consulting on the thing they've always done to make ends meet. There's lots of ways of doing this. I'm not assuming we have limitless ends and means for all of this. But it starts wherever you are. Yeah. I want to change. I've been booted out. I've found something I like better. And then you end up asking the big questions and step by step, sometimes with more trial and error than other, networking in different places, each time testing your hypothesis, maybe this and not that a little bit further, you start getting closer to either that new beginning that you move into or to having the guts to actually leave your day job, and which is why I say sometimes the endings and the beginnings are quite similar.
Yeah, but I love that idea that this dark, messy middle is a guardrail of going too quickly. That's wonderful. That it's actually we are miraculously designed to take the time we need because we can't do anything else. Do you find that people are, because it is so messy and turbulent and emotional, I also find people think they're the only ones with this feeling and problem. Do you find that when you finally bring people together and they realize that?
They're so relieved,
Yeah.
that was always the best feedback I got on working identities. People would say, "Oh, thank God." And, I found out
I'm not insane.
I'm not the only one. There's a lot of relief from that. It's also in part because, a lot of the stories that get told about all of this make it sound, they're so sanitized,
Yeah.
all of the
Yeah.
all of the doubt and the uncertainty and the difficult moments get either forgotten or kind of cleaned up out of the story. And so they think they're the only ones. And then, there's a lot of people feel a lot of stigma about losing their jobs. We've gotten to a point where almost everybody's had some kind of experience like that,
Yeah.
Once you get past that, sharing some of those experiences are very, very healthy. But people, even in their networking, they don't want it to even be suspected of having been in such a situation. And that gets in the way.
Do you see a gender slant to the particular? Because I find women are pretty easy about coming together and sharing all their vulnerabilities, and they sign up for all these change programs. And the men, I feel terrible because I really find they don't have a space. There is no space, and they judge each other incredibly hard.
Yeah, I've got more men than women in my career transitions at 50 plus course. So that's good. Maybe it's because for the pilot, we targeted London Business School alumni, and there's more male alumni of that vintage than women.
And I think they trust in those kind of brands.
They do.
Right? If we're gonna get them, I think that's the perfect gateway.
They do. But it's true that women are more open, especially with each other, with other women, about what they're going through. And that helps process, because if it's all about difficult emotions and you're able to talk about them, it helps process them and do something about them. I also find that, I haven't studied this systematically, how men versus women change careers, but over time I have observed that women tend to be a little bit more proactive in thinking about what is it that I want for this next phase. Maybe the experience of encountering all these glass ceilings makes us think, better be proactive here. Who knows what's going to happen? But I see a lot more of that.
Yeah, and they've had to go in and out. Usually it's been a bumpier ride or something. I think the men have an experience of slightly more linear, where they didn't have to kind of question.
Plus, also there's the kind of the social expectation that they be the breadwinner and the provider, and that they have a high-powered job, and that's it's a tough burden area.
Big one. Yeah. So career change is becoming a huge aspect of this whole longevity conversation. Governments want people to work longer. We're trying to push retirement ages back, get people to stay engaged right into their 60s, maybe even 70s. Do you think this is going to happen? Is this for everyone? Are we going to enter deeply divisive, unequal times? I mean, it's easy for those like us who love to work. And what about those who can't afford the alternative?
The alternative being what?
Who would love to keep working but can't for health reasons, can't because they're not employable, can't because they don't have skills. I mean, it's an inequality issue in society, this issue of being able to work forever.
Yeah, well, let's just remember, not everybody wants to work forever. There's a lot of people, including friends of mine, very much looking forward to their retirement. They've got plenty of interests, and if they can afford it, they'll do it. So I think that's one thing. I'm always hesitant to kind of look into the crystal ball of the future, because we always get it wrong. But, I will bet that this new round of AI is going to kind of change things up quite a bit, and that more and more of us will be facing the need to change into something else. One of the things that I've been thinking about recently is the two places that you and I are most familiar with, UK and France, have national health services, whereas in the US, where I'm from, you need a job to have your health care and your pension and, everything else. I've talked to a lot of people who would love to go plural, have a portfolio career. The usual strategy that people will have here, let me just do some consulting on what I know how to do really well, but is boring, I don't want to do. And then that'll give me some time to take courses or, that kind of thing is a fantastic way to transition, but people don't do it if they don't have that kind of
healthcare.
If they don't have healthcare, or if they don't have a partner who can provide that. So I think that's going to be one of the big issues, because I don't think companies are going to solve it. I think companies are on track to continue streamlining and offloading, managing your career to yourself. They're not so worried about that. I think jobs are going to get scarcer and they're not going to have trouble hiring people. I mean, I just don't necessarily see it happening in companies. Now, they try different things. And, I have to say, I tend to study people who have a lot of resources for career change, people who have a lot of education, who've done lots of things. So it doesn't always generalize, although the process is pretty much the same. And so companies try, I remember I worked a good bit with Unilever and Shell when they were experimenting with the system where people can bid for projects as a way of getting skills and things that they don't have, and as a way of exploring areas. And so there'll be more and more of those things because companies are wanting to be flexible. But I just don't think that's a solution for enough people. And in fact, the problem is, if you think about the universe of people wanting to make these changes, they want to leave those companies. They don't want they don't want another little role. They just want to leave them. They are fed up with the toxic environments, with the politics, with the bureaucracy, with the endless process. They're not happy with those things. And so I don't think that's where the help is going to come from.
You don't think that some of them are just, they just don't want to keep going on the 24/7 inflexible senior. I mean, this whole idea of flexing careers at the end, you don't think it has legs, especially as the younger demographic kind of shrinks a bit? And companies are going to become maybe more interested in retaining their 50-plussers?
To be honest, because I haven't really studied that. I haven't looked at it close up. And so I can't comment in any intelligent way. It could well be. We know lots of occupations in which flexing, in law, in medicine, so many occupations in which that has worked out wonderfully. And I just haven't studied that in the business corporate context, but it may well be. It may well be.
We'll see. We'll do another one when you do. So you've innovated in one organization by starting a 50-plus alumni program at LBS. Can you share? It's just started in November, so you're just a few months in. Anything you want to share? What have you learned? Any takeaways? And what are you doing in it?
Yeah. This is a pilot. And so we decided to open the pilot only to our alumni, but we've already got a waiting list and we're not going to limit it to alumni going forward. We just have to figure out what the formats are going to be. It's an online program and it's got 8 sessions over the course of 4 months. It's got 2 sessions by me at the beginning and at the end on the frameworks and the ideas, and also informed by a survey from the participants about what issues they're working on and they want to work on. And then in between, they have 6 coaching sessions in small groups with coaches working on the different ideas in working identity, your list of possible selves and expanding your network and telling your story. And so there are different small groups for each of the topic. And the idea is to kind of move people along because they have to do stuff.
Yeah.
We're just getting input. We're midway. And so I can't come to big conclusions, but people really do value the ability to share their experiences in groups that feel safe and small enough that you can kind of get quite personal. That they value a lot. They'd like to have more of it than we have provided so far. So we'll have to figure out how to expand that aspect in a next iteration. But we haven't formally debriefed the feedback from this version. We're going to do it at the end. And so stay posted, I would say.
And Eddie, I know you've done some research on evolving priorities for people in this age group compared to their Q2 selves. What is it that they absolutely want more of come Q3?
more time for themselves, more flexibility. They still want challenging work, interesting work. Everybody wants it, no matter what the age, everybody wants meaningful work.
Yeah.
But younger, you care more about the CV building kind of stuff. And older, you care more about having time for other aspects of your life and having that kind of autonomy. Yeah, I can relate to that.
Can't we all? We've got that. We're pretty archetypal. You are writing another book, or you're preparing to write another book. Can you tantalize us with just a little bit? I know you're not allowed to say too much, but
now I can say I am writing. Usually I'm writing a book actually means I'm thinking about the possibility of possibly one day putting pen to paper. But now I can say I am writing, although slowly, because I'm teaching my students right now. It is about career transitions at 50 plus. It's not going to be called that. Titles are always a bear and they come out last.
Yes,
but it is about making these transitions later in our careers. How do we do it? What's the landscape? What are the challenges? I'm following people over time again, seeing what's happening and trying to understand the landscape in a way that I can provide some good how-tos that are evidence-based, that help people understand what's going on, using some of the fundamental ideas in psychology about why we get paralyzed, for example, or how do you deal with fear, or, what does it take to actually be resilient in these kinds of situations? Yeah, I'm having a great time with it, hoping to carve out a bigger chunk of time to get it done.
I can't wait to read it. So we will have another one of these when it's out. One last word. Any advice for all the individuals listening who might have slightly restless toes or fingers as they just begin to think, well, maybe it's time for me to listen to all this transition stuff. What should they do? Where should they go?
So I have found, and this is not my own research, but I've appropriated, sometimes the easiest way to get started is to reactivate your dormant network. So, if you're kind of in your job, just starting to feel restless, think about 3, 4, 5 people that you have enjoyed in the past and you haven't crossed them for, say, 3 years or so because they went to work somewhere else or you've lost track. Write to them and say, hey, I'm working on this project, or I'm in the process of thinking about whatever. I'd love to reconnect, get your thoughts. And it's like a breath of fresh air because we get so trapped in that. We're busy and then we've got our lives at home. And so you get trapped in that confluence of things that defines your current job. And it's really hard to get the excitement or to, just expand your mind a little bit. So that's the best way to get started. And I think the second best way, if you want to have a little bit more courage and you need just a little bit more time, do something. Take a class for how to become a non-executive director, or volunteer for something that kind of gets you out of your day in and day out job, but still has you using your professional competencies and skills or expanding them, and gets you in touch with other people who may well also be in similar straits. That also, obviously, if you know what you want to explore in more detail, go do that. But if you don't even know where to start, you're dormantized, and do something.
Herminia Ibarra, thank you so much for being with us. Folks, you've heard her. Get moving.
Get moving. Just do it. Thank you, Avivah. It's always fun to talk with you.
Until next time. For more thinking about the impact of our 4-quarter lives, you can read my column at Forbes and subscribe to my Elderberries newsletter on Substack. Let's design lives that aren't just longer, but better.